The mansion on the hill was a symbol of power and wealth. The sprawling estate belonged to the prestigious Mitchell family, whose name was synonymous with success in both legal and social circles. At the heart of this empire was Jonathan Mitchell, a 45-year-old man whose sharp features and immaculate presence made him one of the most respected figures in the city. As the managing partner of a top law firm, Jonathan was the definition of success. His life seemed perfect: a beautiful wife, 2 children, and a reputation built on hard work and integrity. He was the epitome of what many aspired to be. But even the most perfect facades can be deceptive. Jonathan's wife, Emily, was equally admired. She was stunning, with soft brown eyes and a warm smile that could light up any room. Together, they were a picture of marital bliss, attending charity galas and social events, always the subject of admiration. Their children, Sarah and Luke, were their pride and joy. Sarah, a bright and ambitious teenager, was destined for greatness, while young Luke, quiet and introspective, had a gentle nature that balanced the family dynamic. Yet beneath this seemingly perfect exterior, cracks were beginning to form. Unbeknownst to Emily, Jonathan had begun an affair with Miranda, a younger and vibrant colleague at the firm. The affair had started 6 months earlier and was becoming increasingly difficult for Jonathan to hide. Miranda, who was eager to climb the social ladder, had quickly become infatuated with Jonathan's charm and power. The affair was an escape for Jonathan, a chance to feed his ego and indulge in the adrenaline of secrecy. But as time went on, Miranda's presence began to feel less like an escape and more like a dangerous trap. Jonathan's life was unraveling quietly. On the surface, everything remained the same. He continued to rise in his career, while Emily remained blissfully unaware of the storm brewing beneath their marriage. Yet, Jonathan found himself increasingly torn between the 2 women. His relationship with Emily had grown distant, and his guilt over his betrayal weighed heavily on him. But he didn't have the courage to confront the truth. He was addicted to the power and control he had over both women, but in his quest for dominance, he was starting to lose control of everything. One evening, Jonathan's world shifted. Emily, always sharp and attentive, noticed something was off. She had always trusted Jonathan implicitly, but the last few weeks had felt different. She couldn't pinpoint it, but there was a distance between them. She noticed how he had become more irritable, how his eyes would linger too long on his phone, how he seemed distracted during their conversations. His perfect facade was beginning to crack, and Emily was beginning to question whether her husband was truly the man she thought he was. The tipping point came one afternoon when Emily found a text message on Jonathan's phone. It was from Miranda. The message was innocuous at first glance, but the time and the intimate tone struck a nerve with Emily. Her heart raced as she realized she had been living in a lie. Her perfect life, built on the foundation of trust, was built on betrayal. Emily was devastated. She didn't confront Jonathan immediately. Instead, she chose to observe. The tension between them was palpable, but Jonathan remained unaware of Emily's growing suspicion. He continued to deceive, unaware that his perfect world was about to implode. Meanwhile, Miranda continued to weave herself deeper into Jonathan's life. He became more distant from Emily, and his late nights at the office grew more frequent. But his relationship with Miranda wasn't just an affair, it was an obsession. He was drawn to her youth, her energy, and the way she made him feel powerful. He began to fantasize about a life with her, a life where he didn't have to pretend anymore. But with every secret meeting, every hidden kiss, the tension grew, and Jonathan's carefully constructed world began to crumble. The cracks were now impossible to ignore. And then, one night, everything changed. It started with a call from Emily's best friend. Sarah had been missing for 48 hours. Emily's heart sank as she heard the news. She immediately dialed Jonathan's number, but there was no answer. Panic set in as she tried to contact everyone she could think of. Her mind raced with fear. Was Sarah in danger? Was she hurt? Had something happened to her? At the same time, Jonathan was at his office, with Miranda sitting across from him. They were in the midst of a passionate conversation when he received the news. Sarah was missing. It was a moment that would change everything. Jonathan's face turned pale. The sudden weight of responsibility, the fear of being found out, and the guilt that had been building inside him suddenly crushed him all at once. He had to act fast. Emily was frantic, not knowing where to turn. She tried to reassure herself, thinking that Sarah would turn up, but the longer she waited, the more she feared the worst. Jonathan arrived home late that night, his eyes filled with a guilt he couldn't hide. Emily could see it, the tension in his body, the coldness in his voice. Jonathan was hiding something, and Emily knew it. The disappearance of Sarah Mitchell was just the beginning. It was the first crack in the facade of Jonathan's perfect life, a life built on secrets, lies, and betrayal. Jonathan's world was about to come crashing down, but in his mind, he could still control the narrative. He could fix things, or so he thought. As the search for Sarah intensified, Emily's suspicions grew. She began piecing together the fragments of Jonathan's behavior, the late nights, the secretive phone calls, and the guarded expressions. She started to dig deeper, but what she discovered would change everything. Her perfect husband, the man she had trusted with her life, was not the man she thought he was. The truth was much darker than she could have ever imagined. The night Sarah went missing was the first time Jonathan had truly felt the weight of his lies. His world, once a perfectly balanced empire, began to tip. The walls he had carefully constructed around his family, his career, and his affair began to crumble, piece by piece. But he was still Jonathan Mitchell, the respected lawyer, the pillar of his community. He had to maintain control. He had to act quickly. The search for Sarah began the following morning, with police combing the estate and nearby woods. Emily, frantic and desperate, turned to Jonathan for reassurance. But Jonathan had none to give. His mind was clouded with guilt, knowing that the disappearance of his daughter was the consequence of his own web of lies. He had tried so hard to keep his double life separate, but now, his sins were on the verge of being exposed. Emily couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong. The disappearance felt like more than just a child running away or a misunderstanding. Sarah wasn't that kind of girl. She had her problems, sure, like every teenager, but she wasn't the type to disappear without a trace. Emily's heart sank as she realized that Sarah's disappearance wasn't a random act. It was something deeper, something darker. It wasn't long before Detective Lisa Harris arrived on the scene. She was a seasoned investigator in her late 30s, sharp-eyed and no-nonsense. She had seen countless cases of missing children, but something about Sarah's case felt different. She quickly turned her attention to Jonathan, sensing that he wasn't as calm and composed as he appeared. Jonathan, despite his outward confidence, was sweating under the pressure of the investigation. He had to keep it together. He couldn't afford to let anyone see that his perfect world was beginning to unravel. Detective Harris was quick to notice the tension between Jonathan and Emily. There was a coldness in Jonathan's demeanor that seemed out of place. Emily, on the other hand, was visibly distraught, her eyes red from crying, her hands shaking. It was clear to Harris that something wasn't right. She knew that Sarah's disappearance was connected to something much larger than just a missing person case. As the investigation continued, Emily found herself sinking deeper into the mystery. She couldn't ignore the feeling in her gut, the feeling that Jonathan was hiding something. She had always trusted him, but now her instincts were telling her otherwise. Emily began to go through Jonathan's things. She started with his desk, a place she had never dared to touch before. She knew that snooping around was a betrayal of trust, but Sarah's disappearance had shaken her to the core. She had to know the truth. What Emily found was a horrifying revelation. Tucked in the back of one of Jonathan's drawers was a journal, its pages filled with disturbing entries. At first glance, the writing seemed innocuous, routine notes about his work, thoughts about his family, and his feelings about his career. But as Emily flipped through the pages, she stumbled upon something that made her blood run cold. There, in Jonathan's own handwriting, were detailed notes about his patients, many of whom were young women. These weren't just typical case notes. These were deeply personal accounts. Jonathan had been documenting his interactions with his patients, tracking their every move, and even making sinister observations about their vulnerabilities. Emily's hands trembled as she read further. Some of the entries were about women who had gone missing, patients that Jonathan had been treating for various issues, including anxiety and depression. He had been using his position of power to manipulate them, drawing them into a world where he controlled their every thought. But what struck Emily the most was the reference to Sarah, her own daughter. Jonathan had written about Sarah in the same detached, clinical tone that he used for his other patients. There was a chilling entry that mentioned Sarah's emotional instability, but the implications of what he had written were clear. Jonathan had been using his professional position not only to control his patients, but also to groom Sarah for some unknown purpose. Emily felt as though the floor had dropped out from under her. The man she had trusted, the man she had loved, was not who he appeared to be. Her mind raced as she tried to piece together the fragments of Jonathan's life, the late nights, the secretive meetings, the changes in his behavior. The affair with Miranda now seemed like the least of her concerns. What had Jonathan been doing with these women? And how had he pulled Sarah into his web? In the midst of her shock, Emily was jolted by the sound of the front door opening. Jonathan had returned from his meeting with the detectives, his expression guarded and unreadable. Emily's heart hammered in her chest as she stared at him. She wanted to confront him right then, to demand the truth, but the words caught in her throat. The man she had built her life with was a stranger, and she didn't know how to face him. Jonathan, sensing the tension in the room, stepped closer to Emily, his voice low and calm. "Emily, what's going on? Why are you looking through my things?" Emily didn't answer right away. She held up the journal, the pages still open to the entry about Sarah. Jonathan's eyes flickered with panic, but he quickly masked it with a forced smile. "It's nothing, Emily. Just some notes from work. You know how I can get sometimes." But Emily wasn't fooled. The journal had shattered the illusion of Jonathan's perfect life, and now the truth was beginning to take shape. She didn't need to hear more lies. She had seen enough. "I know about the affair, Jonathan," Emily said, her voice barely a whisper. "I know about Miranda." Jonathan's face paled. His eyes widened in shock, but there was a flicker of something else in his gaze, something cold and calculating. For a moment, Emily thought she saw a glimmer of fear in him, but it quickly disappeared, replaced by the icy mask of the man who had spent years perfecting his control over others. "You don't understand, Emily," Jonathan said, his voice steady but laced with an edge of desperation. "It's not what you think." But Emily wasn't listening anymore. The man she had trusted with her life had betrayed her in ways she couldn't even begin to comprehend. She wasn't sure if she could ever forgive him. And at that moment, she realized something else. Sarah wasn't just missing. She had been taken, and Jonathan had something to do with it. Emily's world had shattered completely. The revelation of Jonathan's infidelity was just the surface. The discovery of his disturbing journal filled with chilling accounts of his patients, and his manipulation of Sarah plunged her into a realm of horror she had never imagined. Her husband wasn't just unfaithful. He had betrayed their family in ways far darker than she could ever have guessed. The man who had once been her rock was now the center of her deepest nightmare. As she sat there, holding the journal in her trembling hands, Emily's thoughts spiraled. The coolness in Jonathan's eyes, the calculating, emotionless demeanor that now defined him, was all too clear. He had always been a master of control, of projecting an image of respectability and decency. But behind that polished exterior, there was a darkness, a sickness that had festered beneath the surface for years. His obsession with power had driven him to manipulate not only his patients, but also his own daughter. Emily's heart ached as she thought about how her daughter had unwittingly become part of Jonathan's twisted world. Sarah had always been bright, ambitious, and full of potential. But now, Emily couldn't shake the feeling that Jonathan's influence had shaped her more than she realized. What had happened to Sarah? Where was she? Emily needed answers. But the more she looked into Jonathan's life, the more her questions multiplied. Jonathan stood in the doorway of their living room, his face a mask of indifference, but Emily could see the tightness in his jaw, the nervous twitch in his hands. He was on the defensive now, and she could feel the shift in power. Once, Jonathan had been the one in control, but now, as she confronted him with his lies, she could sense his fragility. The cracks in his facade were wide open, and there was no way for him to hide anymore. "What's going on, Jonathan?" Emily's voice was steady, though her chest felt tight with emotion. "What have you done to Sarah?" Jonathan's gaze faltered for the briefest of moments before he regained his composure. He walked into the room slowly, as if carefully choosing his words. "I didn't do anything to Sarah," he said, his voice low and controlled, but there was an edge to it. "You don't understand what's going on. You're not thinking clearly." Emily's heart pounded as she struggled to process what he was saying. She couldn't believe his words anymore. She had been married to this man for over 20 years, and she had believed in him, trusted him, without question. Now, all that trust had been shattered, and the terrifying truth was sinking in. Jonathan wasn't the man she thought he was. He was capable of much worse than she had ever imagined. "I've seen the journal, Jonathan," Emily said, her voice steady, though she felt the weight of each word. "I know what you've been doing. I know about the women. I know what you've done to Sarah." Jonathan's face paled, but he quickly masked his panic with a cold smirk. "You don't know anything, Emily," he said, his voice hardening. "You don't understand. This is all just a misunderstanding. I've been trying to help people. Help you." Emily couldn't help but laugh bitterly at his words. "Help people?" She shook her head. "No, Jonathan. You've been using your position to manipulate people, to control them. And now Sarah's gone. Where is she, Jonathan?" For a long moment, Jonathan didn't speak. His lips pressed into a thin line, and his eyes flickered with something dark, something that made Emily's stomach churn. He had been caught, and there was no denying it now. But despite the pressure mounting against him, he wasn't ready to give up his control just yet. Instead, he turned away from her, walking to the window and gazing out into the night. Emily stood frozen, watching him. She had never seen him like this before, so detached, so distant. He wasn't the man she had married. The man she had known, the man she had trusted, had vanished, replaced by something far more sinister. "Jonathan," Emily said softly, her voice breaking. "Where is Sarah? What have you done to her?" Jonathan turned to face her, his eyes cold and emotionless. "You think you know everything, Emily, but you don't. You don't understand what I've been trying to do. I've been trying to protect you. Protect all of us." Emily felt a chill run down her spine. "Protect us? From what?" Jonathan didn't answer right away. Instead, he walked past her, his footsteps heavy. He was no longer the confident, charming man who had captivated her all those years ago. Now, he seemed like a broken man, a man backed into a corner. But Emily didn't care. Her only focus now was Sarah. She needed to know what had happened to her daughter. "Tell me where Sarah is, Jonathan," Emily demanded, her voice rising in desperation. Jonathan's eyes darkened, and for the first time, Emily saw a flicker of fear in his gaze. "You don't want to know?" he said, his voice barely a whisper. "You'll never be able to understand." Before Emily could respond, there was a sharp knock at the door. Emily's heart skipped a beat, and she felt a wave of dread wash over her. Who could it be? Had the police found something? Had they discovered something she hadn't yet uncovered? Jonathan's eyes flashed with panic as he quickly moved toward the door. Emily felt a pang of anxiety but forced herself to remain still, watching her husband's every move. When Jonathan opened the door, it wasn't the police. It was Detective Lisa Harris, standing on the threshold, her expression unreadable. "I need to speak with you, Jonathan," she said, her tone firm. "It's about Sarah." Emily's heart raced as she watched the scene unfold. Detective Harris had been getting closer to the truth, and she could see the shift in the air. Jonathan wasn't going to get away with this. His secrets were finally catching up to him. As Harris stepped inside, Jonathan's eyes widened, and for a moment, Emily could see the mask slip, revealing the fear that had been hidden beneath. Detective Harris wasted no time. "We found something, Jonathan," she said, her voice cold and professional. "A body. In the woods." Jonathan's face drained of color as the words sank in. The room grew still. The sound of Emily's heartbeat was deafening in her ears. I don't know what you're talking about," Jonathan stammered, but his voice was trembling now, a stark contrast to the calm facade he had maintained for so long. Harris looked at him, her gaze hardening. "We know about the women, Jonathan. We know about Sarah. You can't run from this anymore." Jonathan's back straightened, but his face betrayed his panic. The truth was coming to light, and there was nothing he could do to stop it. Emily felt the weight of the moment settle over her. The nightmare was just beginning, and she was about to uncover the full extent of Jonathan's twisted web of deception. The air in the room was thick with tension. Detective Lisa Harris stood across from Jonathan, her posture resolute and unwavering. The look in her eyes said everything. She wasn't buying his desperate attempts to hide behind his carefully constructed persona any longer. Jonathan could feel the walls closing in on him. For years, he had managed to manipulate, control, and deceive. But now, his secrets were coming to light. And it wasn't just Sarah who was at risk, it was everything he had worked for. His career, his family, his reputation, his entire empire. Emily stood at the doorway, her heart pounding in her chest. She had been bracing for the moment when the truth would finally be revealed, but now that it was here, it was even more horrifying than she could have imagined. She watched as Detective Harris pressed Jonathan, each question like a slow needle unraveling his facade. The man she had once loved was now a shell, his guilt written all over his face. The body in the woods. Emily's mind raced. What did it mean? Was it one of Jonathan's patients? One of the women he had written about in his journals? And why was Sarah connected to this mystery? There was so much that didn't make sense. Jonathan shifted uncomfortably as Detective Harris leaned in. "Jonathan," she said, her voice sharp. "I'm going to ask you again. Where is Sarah? Where is she?" Jonathan's jaw clenched, and for a moment, he said nothing. The silence hung heavy in the air, thick with the weight of the impending revelation. Then, finally, his voice broke through, quieter this time, tinged with desperation. "I don't know," he muttered. "She ran away. She's not. I didn't." Emily's heart twisted with disbelief. "What are you talking about?" she demanded. "Sarah didn't just run away. She's missing. You know something, Jonathan. You've always known something. Don't lie to me." Jonathan's face flushed with frustration, but the panic was unmistakable in his eyes. His tightly controlled exterior was cracking, and for the first time, Emily saw him for what he truly was, a man desperate to preserve his power at any cost. Detective Harris stepped forward, her voice cutting through the tension. "We know Sarah was involved with your practice. We've found records, Jonathan. She was one of your patients. And we've found something else, something that you'll regret hiding any longer." Emily's mind reeled. Sarah, her own daughter, had been one of Jonathan's patients? What did that even mean? How could he have crossed that line? The sheer betrayal, the manipulation, her own flesh and blood had been pulled into this web of deceit. Emily's legs wobbled, and she had to steady herself against the doorframe. She didn't know if she could stomach hearing anymore. Jonathan stood motionless, his hands clenched at his sides, his eyes narrowing. It was as if the walls were closing in on him, and he had nowhere left to hide. But still, he tried to maintain his composure. He cleared his throat, his voice shaky. "I don't know what you're talking about. My patients are private. I have always kept things professional. You have no right to make these accusations." Harris remained unfazed. "We have evidence, Jonathan. Your journals, your notes. You've been documenting your patients, keeping detailed records of their every move, their most intimate fears. And there's a disturbing pattern. You've been controlling them, manipulating them. And Sarah, she was just one of your victims." Emily's chest tightened as the words sank in. The man she had shared her life with, the father of her children, had used his position to manipulate women for his own twisted gain. And now, her own daughter was part of that horrific truth. Jonathan had manipulated and used Sarah in ways that Emily couldn't even begin to comprehend. Jonathan's composure was crumbling faster now. His eyes darted around the room, as if searching for an escape. But there was no escape left. Detective Harris wasn't going to let him slip away this time. "We've also found something else," she continued. "A video. A disturbing video. One that you made of Sarah." The words hit Emily like a physical blow. A video? Jonathan had recorded her daughter? She could barely process the horror of what was being said. Her hands shook uncontrollably, and she could hardly breathe. The truth about Jonathan's dark obsession was finally laid bare. "I didn't," Jonathan began, but his voice faltered, his usual confidence shattering. "I never meant for this to happen. I was trying to protect her, to help her." Emily's heart burned with anger. "Help her? Is that what you call this, Jonathan? You've been controlling her, manipulating her, just like all the others. You don't even see what you've done." Jonathan looked up, his eyes wild with panic. "I never wanted to hurt anyone, Emily. I just thought I could fix things. I wanted to be in control. Everything in my life has always been about control. I thought if I could control them, if I could control Sarah, I could protect her from the world." Emily stepped forward, her voice steady but filled with fury. "You've been destroying her, Jonathan. You've been destroying all of us. You used your power to control people, to manipulate them for your own twisted needs. And now, you've made my daughter a part of this dark, sick game you've been playing." For the first time, Jonathan's mask completely fell away. His face crumpled, and he looked almost human. His voice trembled as he spoke. "I didn't mean for it to go this far. I never wanted anyone to get hurt. But I couldn't stop. I couldn't stop myself." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The man Emily had married, the man she had trusted with everything, had not only betrayed her, but had also betrayed their daughter. And now, the consequences of his actions were crashing down on him. But they were also crashing down on her. Emily had spent years building a life with Jonathan, believing in his integrity, in his intelligence, in his goodness. But now, she saw the monster he had truly been all along. Detective Harris was quick to move in. "Jonathan, we've got enough evidence to charge you with multiple counts of manipulation, abuse of power, and if what we suspect is true, Sarah's disappearance is linked to your actions. You're not going anywhere. We have your confession, your journals, and the video. You're done." Jonathan's eyes filled with tears, but there was no sympathy in Emily's heart. She had seen enough. She had seen the man who had destroyed their family, who had hurt so many people, including her own daughter, and there was no coming back from it. "Please, Emily," Jonathan whispered, his voice breaking. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you. I never meant to hurt Sarah. Please, you have to believe me." But Emily couldn't believe him anymore. There was nothing left to salvage. Her world was shattered, and there was only one way forward. She had to find Sarah. She had to make sure that Jonathan faced the consequences of his actions. Detective Harris moved to arrest Jonathan. His head hung low in defeat. Emily watched as her once beloved husband was led away in handcuffs, his empire crumbling around him. But in the back of her mind, there was only one thing she could focus on: finding Sarah. She had to know where her daughter was. She had to make sure that Sarah was safe and that Jonathan would never hurt anyone again. As the police took Jonathan away, Emily was left standing alone in the wreckage of her life. But she knew one thing for certain: justice was coming, and it would be the only way to restore what Jonathan had stolen from them all. The morning after Jonathan's arrest, the air felt heavier than ever. Emily sat in the living room, staring at the empty space where Jonathan's things once were. The house was quiet now, devoid of his cold presence. She had always been able to rely on him. At least, that's what she had thought. Now, as the walls closed in around her, she could feel the weight of the secrets that had been hidden for so long. Detective Lisa Harris had informed Emily that the investigation into Jonathan's actions was just beginning. The case was far from over, and Sarah's whereabouts were still unknown. But one thing was clear: Emily would not stop until she found her daughter, and she would make sure that Jonathan was held accountable for everything he had done. The night before, as Jonathan was being arrested, Emily had been flooded with emotions. The anger, the betrayal, the overwhelming sadness, it had all rushed to the surface. But now, she had a sense of purpose. The truth had been laid bare, but there were still so many unanswered questions. How had Sarah gotten involved? Where was she? And most importantly, how deep did Jonathan's manipulation run? The police had continued their search for Sarah, but Emily knew that time was running out. The longer Sarah was missing, the more desperate the situation became. Every hour felt like a lifetime. Emily knew she had to take matters into her own hands. The day passed in a blur as Emily tried to piece together the fragments of her shattered life. She went through the house, revisiting memories she had long pushed to the back of her mind. But there was no comfort in the familiarity of their home. It was as if everything had been tainted. The life she had built with Jonathan had been a lie, and now she was left to pick up the pieces. That evening, Detective Harris called her again. Emily's heart raced as she picked up the phone. "Emily, we found something." Harris's voice was tight with urgency. "We found a lead on Sarah." A rush of adrenaline shot through Emily's body. "Where is she? Is she okay?" "We're still piecing things together," Harris replied, her tone serious. "But we found a location tied to Jonathan. It's a cabin out in the woods, near the same area where we found the body." Emily's mind reeled. A cabin? Near the woods? It was all starting to make sense. Jonathan had always been secretive about his time away from home, often disappearing for days without explanation. Emily had brushed it off as work, but now she knew better. This cabin, it had to be where Sarah was. "I'm coming with you," Emily said, her voice filled with determination. "I need to find her. I need to bring her home." "Emily, this isn't a simple search. We don't know what we'll find there. You have to stay back. Let us handle it." But Emily wasn't listening. The fear and the need to find Sarah overwhelmed her. "I'm going," she repeated, more firmly this time. There was a brief pause on the other end of the line before Harris spoke again. "Fine, but stay close and do not get in the way. This is dangerous." "I understand," Emily said, her voice trembling with both fear and resolve. "Just, please find her." The drive to the cabin felt like it took forever. The sun was setting as they neared the remote area in the woods, the last rays of daylight casting long shadows over the trees. Emily's mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, of Jonathan, of Sarah, of everything that had been stolen from her. As they pulled up to the cabin, Emily could barely contain herself. She wanted to rush inside, to tear through the place until she found her daughter, but she knew she had to trust Harris and the officers who were surrounding the area. The cabin was small, run down, and isolated, nothing like the life they had once had. It felt like a tomb, its silence thick with the weight of everything that had happened. Harris motioned for Emily to stay behind as she approached the cabin with a few officers. Emily stood by the police cars, her heart pounding in her chest as the search began. Minutes felt like hours. Emily couldn't stand the waiting. She paced back and forth, glancing toward the officers every few seconds, hoping for any sign that they had found Sarah. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, Harris appeared in the doorway of the cabin, her face grim. "We found her," Harris said, her voice quiet, almost somber. "She's alive, but she's not okay." Tears filled Emily's eyes. She didn't care about the details right now. She just needed to see her daughter. She pushed past Harris, rushing into the cabin, and there, in the far corner, was Sarah. Sarah was sitting on the floor, her face pale and gaunt, her eyes red-rimmed from crying. She looked fragile, broken, but she was alive. Emily fell to her knees, pulling Sarah into her arms, her body trembling as she held her tight. "Oh my God, Sarah. I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry," Emily whispered through her tears, her heart breaking all over again. Sarah's voice was weak, barely above a whisper. "Mom, I'm sorry. I didn't want to. I didn't want to be part of this. I didn't know. I didn't know." Emily shushed her, cradling her daughter in her arms. "It's not your fault. You didn't do anything wrong. I'm here now. You're safe." But as Emily held Sarah, the enormity of everything that had happened began to sink in. Jonathan had done this. He had manipulated and controlled his own daughter, just as he had done to his patients. He had turned Sarah into a victim in his twisted game of power. And now, as Sarah wept in her mother's arms, Emily knew that there was no going back. The man she had married was gone, consumed by his own darkness. The police took Sarah to the hospital, and Emily stayed by her side the entire time. As they waited for the doctors to assess Sarah's condition, Emily couldn't help but think about the future. Jonathan's actions would have far-reaching consequences, not just for him, but for everyone who had been touched by his manipulation. His career was over, his reputation shattered. But what about Emily? What about Sarah? In the end, justice had been served. Jonathan would face the full extent of the law, and his reign of control and deceit had come to an end. But for Emily, the journey was far from over. She had to rebuild her life, piece by piece, and help Sarah heal from the trauma Jonathan had inflicted on her. As they left the hospital, Emily held Sarah's hand tightly. The road ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear: she would fight for her daughter, no matter what. Jonathan had stolen their peace, their trust, their sense of safety, but he hadn't stolen their strength. That, Emily vowed, would never be taken from them. This case proves that secrets never stay buried forever, and when they surface, the consequences can be devastating. Jonathan Mitchell thought he could control everything, but in the end, the truth always finds its way to the surface. Do you think justice was served? Let us know in the comments. And if you found this story compelling, subscribe for more gripping true crime stories.